Alrighty, all set to go here again for round 3 with one of my favorite people on the earth, Nick Ruddock. How are you, bud?
I'm very well. It's very kind of you. Thank you.
I know. I think you are, man. You're one of my good human, and one of my good buddies now. After 3, we were just talking about the physical prep masterclass. I think it's 3 years running that we have our anniversary coming up.
That's a nice way to put it. Yes, absolutely. And the feeling is absolutely mutual, Dave. Love spending time with you and looking forward to another, hopefully, good episode for your audience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you were the first podcast episode that launched when I did this a little over a year and a half ago. And how far we've come. But the first day we talked about more floor concepts. We talked about, some things with tumbling and things of that nature. And then you will be proud to know that you hold one of the most downloaded popular podcasts on my side of the fence with the bar episode that we did 6 months ago, maybe. That one was like a couple thousand downloads the first day. So props on you.
Very cool. Thank you. Awesome.
So I figured today we would round things out, and unless you want to talk about beam, you're probably not maybe the person to do that, but I figured we'd talk about vault today, and that way we kind of round things out on the artistic side for the women's.
Perfect. Yep. Sounds good.
Sweet. And so I really, I don't know, I don't really want to fluff it up at all. I just want to pick your brain, and I want to hear about what you think. I think I have been very lucky to learn so much from you on the technical side and many other pieces of gymnastics, but I'm very lucky that you and I can share videos and we talk about, where does maybe my world of scientific research and the physical prep / flexibility injury side kind of meet with your kind of expertise in technical development. And I'd like to maybe just chat first with what you feel are the more important things of a basic vault. So I think everyone automatically, especially if they're listening to the podcast, thinks like vault equals double twisting Yurchenko or something insane, right? But I think for you and I, we know that a proper foundation of basics and a proper mastery of those basics down to the levels of just hitting the springboard when you're 6 years old of a good stretch jump, or doing a front handspring really, really well when you're a little bit older from that age, is probably more important to talk about first besides jumping to the fancy stuff. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as with all the other apparatus, there's always some foundational skills which are going to support the development of that apparatus. And I guess the beauty of this is that vault for me is very much in line with the previous conversations that we've had on floor, because it's still acrobatic development. And I put them very much within the same family. You've got a key number of skills, 6 skills basically, which are your fundamentals for teaching acrobatics. So I think I might have gone over this before, but I'll just repeat it for anybody that didn't listen to that first podcast.
Please do.
Let's say we've got a cartwheel and a round off. That's in one box. We've got a handspring and a fly spring. Maybe you call a fly spring a bounder, I believe, a 2-footed handspring. Yep. In another box, we have got a flick. Back handspring, sorry. I'm having to change my tempo, my lingo here. We've got a whip. The European audience would call that a tempo salto. And then you've got a straight salto forwards, straight salto backwards. So those are your 6 fundamentals. They're going to cover your acrobatic development and foundations for floor as well as vault. And of course, beam as well. So the beauty of this is that in all the work that coaches would be doing on floor, it's having an immediate impact on the quality of their vaults as well. They're not just teaching these apparatus in silos. They are very much working them all the time when they're doing acrobatic development. So if we just take away that key message, that when you're producing basic fundamental acrobatics, it's going to help to build some of these later skills. And I often say that a double twisting Yurchenko, the teaching process of that does begin with the very first time an athlete walks through the door or a child walks through the door. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're already impacting whether that child is going to learn skills like that in the future, because everything that you do from an acrobatic and physical perspective will immediately have an impact on whether that vault will ever come to fruition. And you and I both know that the vast majority of athletes would never get to the level of doing a double twist for many different reasons. But we really need to set the athletes up for success. And people are probably fed up of hearing this, but basics, fundamentals do have to come first. It's not just a physical thing. It's clearly a technical thing. It's also a psychological thing and a safety thing. So we really need to make sure that we invest time into those 6 key skills. That's the absolute priority. And only after doing so should we look to some of the more advanced skills. And of course, the logical development of those skills, a straight back becomes a twisting straight back, a layout becomes a twisting layout, maybe a double back somersault. Same with forwards twisting. They're just the obvious add-ons, the bolt-ons, if you like, for those key fundamental skills.
Yeah, that's very, very important, and good to kind of rehash our conversation from floor. And I think probably the few that carry over the most, especially, are probably like the front and back layout concepts of being able to really drive well, hit the board, transfer energy, I think is something you've taught me a lot about, is how the vault shouldn't look choppy at any point, whether you're doing, again, you have a 5-year-old doing a run to a stretch jump. You don't want to ever see like big chops or big stops. You want to see like pretty continuous flow of movement. And so how do you feel that the good or bad, that the run carries over more to some of these proper vault mechanics? In floor, you might only have two or three steps, but in vault, for example, you have a pretty big run up that you have to kind of generate energy for.
Yeah, so just coming back to the first point about being choppy, I think it's we have to look at vault as a domino effect. There are so many different stages to the vault, and so if we were to take Yurchenko, for example, you've of course got the run, you've got a hurdle, you've got the round off itself, the lunge onto the hands, you've got the snap, the Corbett action of striking the springboard. You've got board contact, you've then got the lift of the hips, vault contact, second flight. There's so many different stages, and we need to look at that as a domino effect, which means that if the run's not right, it's going to compromise the next stage, which of course has an impact on the next stage and all the subsequent stages. I often get asked the question, what's the point of doing any work on running? If you watch the Olympics and World Championships, everyone runs with different techniques, and some people have got poor running technique. And in fact, some of the best vaulters in the world have not got particularly good technique. However, they're able to produce a lot of force. So they're the ones that are, in a good position. They're able to do the vaults without. There's a number of answers to that. The first one is that you want to be able to run and perform as economically as possible. And so therefore, the better the running technique, the more the athlete is conserving energy. And if they can conserve energy in the run, of course, they're able to then use that energy, which they've conserved, to create force at a more crucial point, which will be hitting the board or hitting the vault. A good run also sets the athlete up to success on the springboard. It means that they are consistent in their approach, and consistency is key. A lot of the challenges that younger athletes have, and maybe less experienced coaches would have, a lot of the challenges are all about the run. The steps are wrong, they're too short, they're too far away, they're running on their toes. There's all sorts of challenges which are very, very common. And it doesn't really take much of a time investment to overcome those, but it does need a little bit of thought, a little bit of consideration. And that will allow the athlete to then perform better when they actually do the vault itself. It's important to remember that a lot of kids will only do a handspring and maybe a Sukahara vault for quite a few years in their early development. It's not like we don't have the time to sort the running technique out.
Yeah.
Vault is a slow burner for a lot of coaches, which is why, and I say this is a very generalized comment, I'm sure there's coaches out there like me that love vault, but many coaches dislike coaching vault. And that's because it is such a slow burner.
Yeah.
Your rate of progress is pretty slow, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that you're waiting for the athlete to physically catch up with their technical ability. So if they can do all these nice drills and shapes, well, that's great, but they've got to be able to do that on the vaulting platform itself onto a hard landing. They're two different areas, and so I just think, being patient and dedicating time to the run whilst you have the time available, whilst we're waiting for these athletes to physically be strong enough to perform a decent Tarot vault, is the smart thing to do.
Yep, I would agree completely. And kind of just sticking with the running thing, are there like one or two common faults that you see, like unfortunately a lot of kids struggle with or coaches kind of have headaches with, that you are constantly fixing?
Yeah, to be honest, there's probably a dozen. Let's start with running on the toes. Okay, now, of course, as gymnastics is an aesthetic sport, we are deducted for flexing of the feet, but you're not deducted for flexing of the feet in the run because the run is not judged, okay? If we just borrow the technique from the athletic world, which is essentially what we should be doing, it's a proven way of running properly, then we should be putting the ball of the foot down, but we shouldn't be on a high ankle. We should be on a stiff ankle. And actually, the more flexed that the toes are, or the foot is, the ankle, then the more force that we can produce through the ankle itself. I mean, you wouldn't want someone running in high heels. It's too unstable. You can't produce force and apply force down into the floor. Whereas a flatter foot, you definitely can. So the first thing would be to have a toes up position. So as soon as the foot is leaving the floor, the toes are pulling up in front. It's encouraging knee flexion. It's encouraging hip flexion. And that, of course, allows the athlete to then strike the floor down very, very hard because the knee's in a good position for the next contact. So flexing the feet, getting the toes up, that's going to be one key part. Very closely linked to that would just be the general posture of the athlete. And again, I've talked about this a lot. You'll know this very well, is that a lot of young girls in particular are lordotic. So they've got this anterior pelvic tilt. As a result of that, their pelvis is rolled forwards. And now what tends to happen with those athletes is as they run, they're lifting their heels behind them because their pelvis is tipped. It kind of changes the cyclic action of the legs. And so you've got these heels kicking behind, which as a result of that stops the knees from lifting. Now, that doesn't only have technical implications, but also puts a lot of strain on the hamstring and the hip flexors, which potentially could be contributing to some of the hip flexor and hamstring glute site issues that we see a lot of, which are quite prevalent in young girls, particularly as they're sort of going through puberty. So that will be the second thing. Now, it's very closely related to the point I made before, because if the ankles are flexed and the toes are lifting up nicely, then you will probably be avoiding or mitigating the risk of their heels coming up behind them. So those are two of the obvious things. I guess the third thing would be about the stride pattern. I'm a big advocate for counting the number of steps that the athletes need to take when they run. And just to set the picture, this is what usually happens. You have a kid, let's say they start, do you use meters or do you use feet on your running tape?
Yeah,
use feet. I don't even know what 21 meters would be, but we got 25 meter run up for Fig. I'm going to go with meters, I'm afraid. Let's say the athlete starts at 21, they do their run, they get the steps wrong, and then the coach would go, just move back a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then they do it again and they've moved back, but because they've moved back, they're actually just going to add a couple of extra steps in there, or maybe one more step. They might now be on the wrong leg. So the coach goes, move back again. So now they're at 22. They don't know how many steps they're taking. They don't know what leg. They're basically just trying to chance the fact that they might be in the correct place. Okay. Now the athlete's worried about it. So they're not going to run fast because they're constantly worried about whether they're going to be in the right position on the board. They won't know that until they get much closer. So they're over processing and overthinking about their strides, and the whole thing just becomes a mess. You go to a competition and the surface is different. So instead of running on a soft floor, you're now running on a much firmer surface. That's going to change the plyometric effect. It's going to make them travel across a greater amount of the vault run up on each stride. And now their run's wrong. And again, in a competition environment, you're suddenly saying, right, no, move back a little bit. No, come forwards a little bit, or start on the other leg. And it's just a mess. Okay. So the obvious thing here, guys, is just know how many steps is the optimum number of steps for that athlete. And as a very general rule here, if you're doing a Yurchenko vault and you're a junior, you're probably taking 11 or 12 steps. Okay, if you're doing a forward entry vault, you're somewhere around the 13 mark. It's normally a couple more than a Yurchenko because of the hurdles different. And if you use that as your starting point, you just basically, you count them. So you count every single step, even the tiny ones, you count everything. And let's say it was 13 steps for this particular gymnast that's getting it wrong. You would just say, okay, I want you to move back half a meter, but you're going to start on the same leg and you're going to take the same number of steps. And as a coach, you would have to count the steps to make sure that they haven't added a few in.
Yep.
But essentially, we're just trying to make each stride either longer or shorter, but the number of steps would stay the same. Okay. And then you've got your optimum point, and you can write it down as a coach, and you know that, right, she starts at 22. She takes the left leg as the starting leg, and she takes 12 steps. And once you've got that written down, and let's say you go to a competition arena and she's too close to the board, you can just say, I want you to start 30 centimeters back. You still start on your left leg. We're still going to count 15 steps. And you're able to just adjust by moving forwards and backwards very, very slightly, but nothing else changes. So it's an obvious one for me. And it's something that, again, the athletics world would do if they were doing a triple jump or a long jump. There, it's very much deliberate. They know exactly how many steps it would take them to get from point A to point B. And whilst it does evolve as they grow, because as they get stronger, you might need to move them back a bit. You might need to take a step out. You might need to add a step in. I don't know. You should always have your starting point of knowing how many steps is optimum for that particular athlete. And as a general rule, use as much of the vault run up as you can.
Very well put, man. Tons of good information. I can definitely sing your praises on that, because when we 3 years ago first met, I had a group of younger athletes that were learning Yurchenkos for the first time. And I had kind of gone previously on just like, again, what I had been taught, which is just like, oh, about here, you kind of try here and you kind of fiddle with it. But I'd asked you and you said the same thing. And that was extremely helpful for us to teach those young athletes very early. I mean, they grew a lot, so we changed things a little bit, but to maximize their power when they're young, to not be afraid of doing Yurchenko entries, which I think is what had happened in a previous round of athletes that I work with, is we didn't teach the proper run mechanics and the proper run up steps. And they were always kind of timid because they didn't know, like you said, if they're going to be close or far. So I guess we didn't have a really accurate visual of like how powerful they were, how like we need to change maybe some board settings because they weren't going as hard as they could. And then this group that we had, who had that confidence from an early age when we did them over a resi mat or something like that, they feel like they have normal mechanics every single time, and when they run, and it was very, very helpful.
Yeah. And athletes are not going to run at full speed if they're unsure about where they're going
Sure.
to be on the springboard or
Sure.
on the runway. So people talk about, being afraid, and it's not necessarily fear, as in like fear I'm going to hurt myself. It's doubt. It's self-doubt. If
Mm.
I run at full speed, I don't think I'm going to be in the right place. That's essentially what the athlete is thinking. It's not
Mm.
fear of hurting himself as such. It's just maybe the consequence of getting it wrong. you
Yep.
know and it's really important that you just encourage the athletes to have a lot of patience, and that has to be echoed with the coach, because what would normally happen is it can take up to like a week to get an optimum run sorted.
Mm.
There's not many athletes that are willing to fail their run that many times in
Yeah.
order for you to make those adjustments without losing confidence, getting really frustrated, or thinking that they're terrible on vault. So you kind of need to set the tone and say, I want you to know that this process might take us even up to 2 weeks. Okay.
Mm.
But after that, we're going to have a great season of vault, because we're going to know how to run and approach the board without these issues. We're going to be running economically. We're going to be running consistently. It's going to increase the success rate of doing these vaults, but it might take us 2 weeks to get there.
Yeah.
So I want you to know that it doesn't bother me at all if you're going to be running out, if you're going to be in the wrong place, because this is a process that we have to go through to get to the other side. Once you've had that discussion, it kind of allows them to relax a little bit, knowing that they might be in the wrong place. Now, some coaches might be listening thinking, 2 weeks? Are you kidding me? Yeah. Now, most of the time, it doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
If I've got a high level athlete, I can normally fix it within 30 minutes. When I say fix it, I mean get the position right on the vault runway. But yeah, some athletes, it might take a little bit longer, but just make sure, because the worst thing you can do as a coach is screaming and shouting at the kids saying, go forwards, go backwards. This is ridiculous. You were training fine last vault. Nothing's changed. The vault's in the right place, in the same place. And all those kind of things that I see often.
Yeah.
So just take the pressure off them.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times there's like, one off day or one bad day, and the person's like, "Oh, my steps are wrong." I'm like, "Oh God," like it's the same thing, and like they kind of flip out, and it becomes this point of friction between the athlete, and then everybody gets frustrated. So, agree, take your advice, and just sort out the reasons.
Yeah, and just focus on solutions, not problems. I mean, yeah, the problem is the athlete's in the wrong place. Well, great. That's obvious. Now the solution is you either need to move a tiny bit forward or a tiny bit back, but we're going to stay in the same starting leg, and we're going to stay with the same number of steps. It's just about providing solutions, which is the case for all coaching. Coaching is problem solving. And the best coaches that I've spent time with have been the most creative problem solvers, or maybe the most proactive problem solvers, because they look for solutions.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of less experienced coaches will just be very good at identifying problems. You're bending your legs. You were too low. You threw your head back. Well, that's great. Fantastic. You've just identified all the problems that this athlete has got. Well, let's come up with the solutions instead. And a solution-based approach is going to be much more beneficial for the athlete.
Yeah, man. Very good. And I very quickly just want to, again, confirm what you were talking about with hamstring stuff. But before I don't want to take any time at all, but running in an overextended posture, leaping in an overextended posture, and doing a lot of toe-ons or in-bars in a very overarched posture is one of the main triggers for people who have growth plate irritations of their hamstrings. I treat athletes who like literally for a year can't get over hamstring apophysitis is the technical term, but they can't get over it because they don't have technically and physically prepared, alignment, I guess is the best way to put it. They don't really understand how to run in a good posture or sprint in a good posture or arch in a good posture. And when you combine that with all the eccentric loading, it pulls on the growth plate and it causes a huge problem. So take the time to fix running mechanics and to fix how they drop in really in a good shape for a toe on. They shouldn't have this big arch. They shouldn't do a huge switch leap in this massive arch because it pre-tensions the growth plate and the sciatic nerve. So just a quick aside.
Yeah, and I think it's the accumulation. It's you got to factor in. You might have an athlete with. You say that it's pre-tension. You've got that pre-tension, haven't you? Because of the anterior pelvic tilt already. The hamstring is already lengthened.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got running in an overextended position. Plus that athlete is going to leap in the same position. Plus they might toe on in that position. Plus they might land and hinge through the hip too much rather than bending and squatting through the knees and the hips. So I think it's the accumulation of all that happening at the same time as them growing.
Yep.
And that's why it is so prevalent. And apophysitis is at the hip and the glute attachment.
The hamstring attachment of the three hamstring muscles come to one tendon on the glute. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's the really common one that I've certainly come across and is very, very prevalent. So I think it's something that we can definitely be better at, which isn't going to just be fixed through better running technique, but and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but yeah, better posture. And of course, a physical preparation program, which combats some of these red flags.
Yeah, man. I think this situation has been the most common reason of why I'm such a fan of the properly dosed external loading for gymnasts, because single leg RDLs in an eccentric focus or single leg hip thrusters or hip lifts are one of the main ways to build resilience in that area. And I think that's like when I saw those going on, like Brett Contreras' research and some other people, I was like, this is insane that no young gymnasts are doing these, because not that we're going to prevent a growth plate from obviously having an issue, it has to close and fuse, but you can definitely physically repair those with RDLs and glute lifts, or like hamstring sliders or proper running drills. So
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
definitely.
cool. So yeah, I want to get back to the actual vault. So moving on, then let's talk a little bit maybe about board impact and board position. Let's just go for a front handspring first, and then we'll switch gears after we go through a whole front handspring situation. We'll go back to maybe your Chenkos. But so say the run up is good, say they have their distance and stuff like that. Personally, my observation is there's a lot of athletes who maybe lack stiffness on the board, or also maybe sometimes don't understand how to create tension on the board, and they kind of get rocked by gravity when they hit it, and it causes a very big like arm throw forward, or the hips pike out. So what are your thoughts or suggestions around this area?
Well, you're absolutely right. Everything you said there, I completely agree with. The concept of vaulting for me, the three C's: create, conserve, and convert energy. So we're creating energy through the run up. We should be creating energy by contacting the board. Good technique conserves energy, whereas bad technique leaks energy. So obviously energy is transferred. It's either lost to the atmosphere or it's lost to the apparatus.
Mm,
Running on toes with an unstable heel will be leaking energy into the floor, and therefore it's inefficient economically. You're not able to conserve the energy that you're trying to produce through the muscles. So that's an energy loss kind of example. Contacting the springboard would be exactly the same, and you used my favorite term, stiffness.
mhm,
Stiffness, for anyone that's unsure, is the body's ability to be rigid, specifically more rigid than the apparatus itself. And if you can be more rigid than the apparatus, then the apparatus will provide energy to the athlete. However, if it's the other way around, if the apparatus is tighter than the athlete, in this case, let's say the springboard is stiffer and therefore the athlete buckles their knees when they contact the board, then that's when they'll leak energy loss. So instead of conserving it, we've lost it. And the whole idea of creating energy and conserving it is that we can convert it into, I don't know, a straight Sukahara or a handspring front half or a double twisting Yachenko. It doesn't really matter.
mhm,
Um, Stiffness is a physical quality, but with a lot of technical kind of input as well. Meaning that if your athlete isn't strong enough to do the positions in the first place, it doesn't matter what technique you go for, they're going to collapse on the board.
mhm,
So an element of sound plyometric ability, and you quite rightly said there about piking through the hips. If you think about the junctions that the lower body has, you've got three major junctions: hip, knee, and ankle. They're all designed to hinge, technically meaning they're all designed to collapse. They can
mhm,
collapse, they can extend. If you don't teach kind of the resistance against that, which is this concept of stiffness, then that is what a lot of the athletes are going to do. It happens forwards more than it does backwards normally. Okay, certainly on the floor. So you will see the knees buckle a lot on the springboard on forwards vaults. And, actually, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that only a Yachenko vault, you get an awful lot of hip and knee collapse. So it's probably more relevant for floor. But yes, stretch jumps, just doing a vertical stretch jump off a springboard is a fantastic exercise. And even the high level coaches that are listening to this, you might be thinking, oh, this is a bit basic. I've watched the Japanese Olympic team senior team doing stretch jumps off a springboard up onto a 60 centimeter block, and they've done it for like 25 minutes as a side station, really. And the vault themselves, they were doing their full competitive vaults, so they were doing Kaz double twist and Sukahara double backs and all this kind of crazy stuff, and then they would literally do a stretch jump onto a block. The sort of vault that you might see in your lower levels of compulsories, like level 3 or 4 in the US. I don't know what it is, but in the
yep.
US, and you're thinking, well, what's the purpose? Why would a team of that level of experience be doing such a basic exercise? And it's because it's so important. It doesn't matter what level you are, you still need to be reinforcing, in this case, an upright position on the springboard where they're not collapsing and they're not leaning forwards. And for that reason, I continue to do that with athletes of all levels. I've
Mm.
just come back from a training camp with the German national team in the Caribbean, which was quite nice. And we did very similar exercises, stretch jumps up onto the vault. I was there with the French team as well. It was a joint training camp and had the pleasure of watching them do their forward entry vaults. They're very good at them. They spent a lot of time doing a stretch jump from the board up onto the vaulting table.
Mm.
Essentially, what they're trying to do is teach the principle of of stiffness, and adjusting the shoulder position until it's in its optimum place. Now, when you're running forwards, let's say that you've done a 20-meter run, you've got a lot of horizontal speed. You're already traveling in a forwards position.
Hmm.
And so the athlete doesn't need to lean forwards because their body's already carrying all of that horizontal momentum, all of that velocity. And therefore, the optimum position for the springboard is actually going to be quite upright. They'll have the feeling of leaning backwards as they enter the board, and that will just put them in the correct place when they come to contact the vault itself. It's going to depend on the athlete, but ultimately, we don't want the hip to be collapsed at all. We don't want the shoulder passing in front of the hip. We want the shoulder behind the hip.
Sweet. Yeah, very well. And I think the natural question that popped into my mind that I know a lot of audience is going to think about is like, is there consideration to board distance and number of springs in the board? I know it's highly contextual to the athlete, but is there, for a front entry vault, are you kind of guessing somewhere to start before the athlete based on their height, or you're just kind of like starting at one standard and then you just like, okay, we'll adapt to this?
Yeah, I think it is so contextual. There's so many variables here. You've got what's the actual physical size of the athlete? How tall are they?
Mhm.
Therefore, what's their stride length? What's their arm reach distance? How well can they produce force on the board? Can they compress the board? You might have a taller athlete that has, in inverted commas, no legs. Like they just cannot produce force, and therefore you can't compare that athlete to let's say a shorter athlete that is able to produce much more force explosively on the springboard. So I think there's a lot of variation there, and the same thing with the number of springs. You just have to go on kind of the obvious stuff. If they're bottoming a board,
Yeah.
then get the springs in. You just got to make sure again that they're physically able to tolerate that added force, because hitting a coil board with 7 springs is going to put a lot more force through the joints, hip, knee, ankle, lower back, than it will on a softer springboard. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of parts to this. There's the physical and the technical again.
Yeah.
Are they strong enough to tolerate those forces which are going through the body?
Yeah, absolutely. We've probably all seen both. We've seen the very taller, maybe older, more experienced athlete that's still, like you said, that's just not their forte, is hitting the board with real high tension. Then you've seen these like very young, tiny firecrackers who hit a loaded board and do great. So personally, I think from learning from you more is honestly just testing that in the stretch jump drill, and it's having somebody do that up to the vault table, or move the vault table and put it on the actual just runway and have them just do a nice high stretch jump. And if they collapse under everything under just a stretch jump condition, it's probably not going to go well when they try to do a real vault. So you can kind of play around with that a little bit. That's for the actual board spring number, but distance, obviously you have to play around with the vault table.
Yeah, I think so. And moving on from the stretch jump, for the coaches that are hungry to know a little bit more,
Yeah.
I would be doing a stretch jump, and then I would be doing a salto, a front somersault over the top of the vault. And so I guess the ultimate there is to do a layout up to a mat stack, and that's forwards and backwards depending on what vault you're doing.
Yeah.
But just a simple straight front up to a nice high mat stack, concentrating on the body rising over the table, not leaning forwards, keeping the hip open so that the board is able to provide energy. We've got to remember that the board is pushing vertically up against the force. If the hip is closed, then that's going to encourage even more of a pike, because the board will push the body into a greater pike position. If the hip is stiff and flat and the board is pushing vertically, it will help the body to rise over the top of the vault. So a straight front is the next step from a stretch jump. And of course, then we can start to really alleviate the fear. It's a case of, can you attack this vault? Can you run towards a stationary object really, really quick and not have to worry about contacting it? And you can develop the confidence of approaching the board and attacking the run and attacking the springboard, compressing the springboard as hard as possible without the athlete having to worry about what's happening on the other side of the vault. So I think there's a number of different benefits.
Yeah.
For the coaches listening that think, well, that's quite a big step from what I'm doing now, like you just quite rightly said, I think probably 80% of the vault work that I do, no, that's probably a bit steep. Let's say 70% of the vault work I do is not on the vault.
Yeah.
It's maybe on the tramp, maybe on a springboard tramp, definitely using blocks, incline boards, just things like that. So just get a springboard, get a normal block, stick it on its side, and just build up the confidence slowly until they're going over a soft block, which is the same height as the vault.
Yep.
Then just put the vault right down to its lowest setting, stick a thin soft mat over it, so it's actually easier than what the soft block they've just done is, and just build it up that way. There's always an approach to build up the confidence in a gradual way.
Yeah, yeah, very well put. And I think my last point about this before we move on, maybe some Yurchenko backward style is, so you talked about angles and keeping the hip angle open and things of that nature, but a lot of people struggle with the actual blocking of the table to do a front handspring when they turn that from layout, or eventually as it comes down to a suit. But what are your thoughts or suggestions for being able to maintain a good shoulder open angle and then either create stiffness, or, how someone should be thinking about progressing to get better power in their shoulders?
Okay, so I've got a couple of things here. One of them might be a little bit controversial. The first one is physical preparation. I mean, it underpins everything. So if the athlete can't open the shoulders, if they can't maintain what you would call a hollow position, what we tend to call a dish shape,
Yeah.
if they can't maintain that on contact, then obviously they're going to leak energy again. And you'll see that through the elbow, you'll see that through the lumbar or thoracic spine. You would see that through the shoulder angle closing. So it's all well and good being able to do static shapes really nicely on the floor, which
Mm,
I think there's been a great increase in recent years through content being shared online. But if the athlete can't do that through movement, then it's kind of been lost.
mhm.
Okay, so a handstand shape on the floor is very, very different than running and attacking the vault and contacting the vault with all that force. We probably do a lot more plyometric stuff of the legs than we do the upper body.
Sure.
But if you think about vault, it's just as plyometric off the upper body. A round off needs to block off the hands. Of course, the vault phase when we contact the vault is exactly the same. Just doing some handstand bounces on the floor, doing a handstand bounce on the vault itself is a great exercise. So maybe from 5 steps, they just
Mhm.
do a handstand bounce up onto on the vault. They might bounce uphill onto another surface.
Mhm.
They might do a handstand or a bounce into the wall. So you kind of put a springboard against the wall, a mat on the floor. They do their underarm swing. They contact the wall. They block off the wall. They land on their stomach. So what we're trying to teach here is the concept of repulsion.
Mhm.
And the best concept for me of teaching repulsion to an athlete is if you just get a bouncy ball and you throw it at the vault, the ball will, of course, immediately just ricochet off.
Mhm.
That is the concept of vaulting. It is allowing the apparatus to do the work instead of the athlete working too hard.
Mhm.
And if you watch great vaulters at high level, you'll notice that the vault does an awful lot. They
Yeah.
contact the vault stiff. The vault does the repulsion. They're massively high in the air. And then of course they do their skill. I mean, let's say the obvious examples of, phenomenal athletes like Michaela Moroni. If you just watch the way that she contacts the vault with an incredible amount of stiffness through the upper body and how much the vault just launches her up,
Mm.
it looks almost effortless because
Yeah.
she doesn't look like she's actually done that much. Now, of course,
Yeah.
we know that she absolutely has, but that is pure repulsion.
Mm.
The problem, this is the controversial part, the problem of teaching handstand fall to flat back or having the vault too high so the athlete basically can't vault properly is that the hands will be in contact with the vault for too long.
Mm.
So, and I don't like handstand flatbacks. So I don't know what you would call it, but they jump to handstand,
Yep.
they keep their
Yep.
hands on the vault and they would just fall.
Yeah.
There should be no part of falling in vault. It's the absolute wrong way to start off the message of this is how you perform a vault.
Mm.
A much better compulsory vault would be a handstand bounce fall to flat back, because then you're getting them to pop off the hands. They learn the repulsion, and the way of falling onto the back is just a safe way of them getting down and finishing the vault. So I personally, it's easy for me to say this because I don't teach kids at a compulsory level.
Yeah.
But I personally, if I had the option of not doing flatbacks, then I wouldn't.
Mhm.
It's teaching the opposite. I call that a kind of like a waterfall action for some reason.
Yeah.
They just kind of bend off the vault sometimes. And part of the reason of contributing to this is that a lot of coaches just leave the vault at the same height and they just get everyone to vault over it. So
Yeah.
if you've got kids that are smaller than the vault itself, then it doesn't matter what technique you opt for, they're probably not going to vault very well.
Mm.
They won't be able to bounce off it. They can't get their hip up high enough above the table to be able to contact with straight arms. So just forget the rules. Just put the vault down in training. Let them understand this concept of vault so that they feel the bounce, they feel the repulsion, they are set up for success, they build their confidence, and then slowly start to increase the height of the vault as they develop their physical qualities.
Very well put. Very well put. I don't think it's controversial at all. I think it makes very logical sense in my mind. But I would like to, because I don't want to spend the whole time talking about front handsprings, but let's maybe flip this around and talk more about Yurchenkos, because a lot of people are kind of aiming towards the Yurchenko path more so. So ignoring the run, but talking maybe starting with the hurdle / the round off, position. What do you? There's so many problems, and I'm sure you see that come up very commonly in things that you find that people are maybe overlooking in terms of just basic physical prep or just basic positioning. So can you share your thoughts on the round off part of Yurchenko?
Yes, absolutely. It's probably the phase that I spend most of my time at. As you know, when I'm consulting with the federations, it's normally on vault and floor and physical prep. So this is very much a kind of area that I do spend a lot of time in. I'm not going to talk about the run, but of course, the distance from the board before they start the hurdle is crucial. If they're too close, the hurdle is going to be incorrect or too far away. We must see the hurdle as an extension to the run. So the same qualities that we'd look for in the run, we would also look for in the hurdle. And that means an upright body position, so almost completely neutral, almost. The knees should still be high. I encourage a flexed foot throughout the hurdle, which is definitely controversial because people think it looks ugly. So for those listening, the hurdle is not a deductible part of the round off because it's not actually a skill. The round off itself is the coded element. The hurdle is a phase, which is an intermittent section which break or connects, if you like, the run to the round off. It's not judged. And so if you're encouraging a knee up action with a flexed foot in the run, you should be looking to do the same thing in the hurdle because you want it to be fluent. Any changes in the cadence or the ankle and the mechanics will result in energy loss. Okay, so I'm looking for that same flexed foot, high knee position, upright torso, long reach, of course, onto the hands. And the first opportunity for upper body stiffness would happen in the round off itself. So when the hands are on the mat, does the athlete leak into the floor by collapsing through elbows and shoulders, or are they able to really push up tall? That one phase that I've just described there is probably where we see most of the issues which would set up the vault. So the common things would be not lunging for long enough, so therefore the athlete is jumping, or they're basically flying through the air. And that means that they collapse onto their hands because they've got to land on their hands rather than placing the hands down. You'd have the kids that do like a jump half turn onto the hands. So you've got any energy loss there. Very, very common. Towards the end of the round off, the same upright position that we talked about for the forward entry vault is pretty similar here for Yurchenko. I don't want to get too biomechanical, but you've got what's called a pivot phase on the springboard, which is basically you've got the angle coming into the board, and then you've got the angle coming out of the board. And there is a pivot in between because in that time, the board compresses and then bounces back up again. And so whilst as we are coaching the kids, we want them to, we say things like get upright, be completely upright. The mechanics of that is actually incorrect. You would expect them to enter slightly forwards as they contact the board, just slightly, so that after the board's compressed and they've come back up, they're then in an optimum position to get the hip up. That's essentially what we're trying to do in the round off exit, is get the hip up as quick as we can to create momentum, to create rotation. And that rotation, of course, is in the back handspring back to the table.
Sure.
Okay. So upright body is what we're the feedback we're given is getting into an upright position. We want them to lift the hip as soon as they are leaving the springboard as much as possible. Of course, be stiff. And something that I also talk a lot about is the vision. I want the eyes on the hand mat. Okay. Now, so if we think about another common mistake is as the feet come down in the round off, the head usually goes back. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when a heavy object like the head goes backwards, something will normally go forwards. And of course, when we think about the three junctions, the knee is the one that tends to collapse. So you've got head moving back, knees going forwards. We've now leaked energy. By the knees going forwards, the body gets lower. And remember, we're trying to bounce. We're trying to get the hip higher. So it's having the opposite effect. Okay. When we have the head in alignment, we're more likely, doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen, we're more likely to stay stiffer with the lower body. By staying stiffer with the lower body, the hip stays higher. It allows the board to lift us up, and the hip gets up to a much more optimum position to contact the vault. So I'm hoping this is relatively simple for people to keep track of.
It makes sense.
Talking about it, over audio as opposed to seeing a video. But yeah, these are some of the main considerations that coaches need to spend time on. My favorite selection of exercises would be a handstand snap down onto a springboard stretch jump. Again, for the same reason of doing a stretch jump forwards, you want them to understand hip stiffness and body position. I would then do the same thing with a round off, so round off stretch jump, and then I would start to build up a round off salto, so round off layout over the top of a block, and a round off layout over the top of the vault onto a mat stack. If they can do that, then they are much, much more likely to be able to contact the board with stiff legs. That differs from the approach of teaching Yurchenko like a back handspring. Okay, so I used to do that. Through gaining more experience and knowledge from traveling the world, working with high-level athletes, I've decided myself that isn't the best route. When you teach a back handspring, most kids bend their legs. So therefore, if you take that same association over to the vault, you'll get the same concept. When you teach it like a somersault, like a salto, like a layout, you will normally connect with the athlete much better in terms of them bouncing. So doing a round off straight back will give you a better bounce on the board than doing a round off back handspring, where you'll see the knees buckle. So it might seem like a subtle difference in methodology, but actually it's quite significant in the approach and the outcome that you get.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All very good stuff. My head is kind of spinning, trying to process.
Sorry.
But no, it's good. I'm learning. I like this. So just two questions on the round off phase before we move on to actual backhand, or not the whip, I would call it. But so one is distance of hand mat to board. People ask a lot about, and two is I think a lot of kids unfortunately just have very slow round offs. So they kind of hit with their feet really far behind them and they buckle through. So what are your thoughts on hand mat distance? I'm sure it's contextual, highly based on the individual. But then also, what are your maybe go-to drills to correct maybe the slow speed of a round off to a kid that's maybe not really getting full power?
Yeah, okay, let's go with the first question. Again, unfortunately, this is very contextual. I would like to say I want the hand mat to be as close as possible, but that's just not the case. It really does depend, quite like you've just said on the second point. If a kid's got a slow snap down or a slow courbet, which was what we called it in Europe, then you might need the hand mat to be further out, because they're not going to be able to get the feet down, like vertically down into the floor. There's going to be a bit more of an arc, which is not optimum, but if that's what the athlete does, then you kind of got to manage that.
Especially longer athletes.
Exactly. Taller athletes, it depends on how much ground they're covering. If they're running full speed, they've got a lot of horizontal velocity, then the round off will have and follow a different path. They're able to convert more energy. So unfortunately, that's a really difficult. What I don't want to do is say to the coaches, make sure it goes lengthways, not widthways with the mat. Start off, because you really have to be presented with the athletes in front of you. But do consider that when you're looking at making the changes of, okay, the round off's too slow or it's too long. Do just think about, if I was to move the hand mat in a little bit, will that give me the effect that I want? Or what if I tweak it out? Maybe if I need to turn the mat the other way around. So just consider those things, but it's a bit tricky for me to give much golden nuggets on that one.
Loaded question.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm sorry. The second point was about the speed of the round off. Okay, so the speed of the round off. If we think about the run, let's assume that we've got a good run. So it's not the fact that we don't have enough energy in the first place. The speed is now going to come from a number of areas. One, how quickly does the upper body go from the upright hurdle position and drive down to the hand mat? So if we think that, as I mentioned before, the run should be upright, the hurdle should be almost upright, very, very slightly forwards only, just in a hollow position. When the upper body is up, you're able to create a stack of energy by throwing it down towards the floor. By doing that, the back leg should then drive and kick over hard as well. And therefore, you've got this really fast turnover. Mm-hmm. If an athlete's leaning forwards when they're running, then they're in an off-balance position, which one is a little bit risky, and two, doesn't allow them to create as much force because they can't actually create that tipping action. Mm-hmm. They've only got that, they're already leaning forwards. They haven't got the same amount of momentum by throwing their chest down. Yep. In return, it doesn't allow the back leg to come over. So the first thing is get that upright position and get them to physically think about throwing the upper body down towards the floor. That's going to encourage a turnover. Yep. The back leg needs to continue to drive over in a straight line. Yep. Now, this is particularly difficult for kids that have got poor hip flexion and hip extension. More hip extension, because if their back leg, if they can't do like a needle kick, for example, or a kick like that with nice active range, then that's going to be demonstrated in the round off as well. When the back leg stops, it's slowing the turnover. Whereas when the back leg can continue aggressively, it's continuing that turnover, that angular momentum that we want. Okay. And what you'll see with kids that have got poor hip extension is the leg will stop and the hip will pike instead. Sure. This is one of the reasons why a lot of athletes will go around the side with their legs. It's not because they're not trying to go over the top. It's that they don't have the hip mobility for their back leg to travel over the top. So when I'm working with younger kids, I say about drawing a rainbow with their back leg from the over to the springboard, because it's just in their head. It makes it easier to understand that arc, that line of I guess the trajectory of what the back leg should do. So draw a rainbow with the back leg. That might work for some coaches with their younger kids. And then the last thing would be, how actively can you actually snap down into the board? And in doing so, you want the shoulders to close and you want the hip to flex. Okay, so the fastest way to get the feet into the springboard is vertically down, right underneath you. The quickest way to do that is to pike at the hip. All right. So instead of keeping a beautiful open hip line, which might look aesthetic but will be slower, I'm very happy with the feet piking down aggressively into the springboard.
Mm.
That produces more force. It allows the springboard to be compressed. And then in doing so, of course, we get the energy creation from the springboard. Now, don't misunderstand that with landing on the springboard in a pike shape. That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Right.
saying the feet come down very aggressively, but the upper body is going to come up at the same time.
Right. To get to that upright position you talked about.
Upright position that I was talking about before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And perfectly kind of segueing to obviously the last part of the book, but the last thing to talk about here is, so now finishing through, you have good run up, good transfer. You've done your layouts, your things of that nature. How do we actually get these very good aggressive round offs to transfer back to the table into a nice back handspring, right? Or sorry, I keep saying back handspring.
Yeah, back handspring is fine. Yep.
And then how do we actually create a good, shape change through the change of action onto the vault table to get a good flip shape? And then are there any things? Yeah, just the last piece of the vault. What's the kind of next step to finish this all out? Because it will end the podcast nicely.
Okay, so I think that, again, I'm going to link this back to physical preparation again. Has the athlete got the range of motion through the shoulders to be able to demonstrate the contact position that you're looking for? And for most kids, you're going to be looking for a pretty typical back handspring position. So somewhere quite close to handstand. Definitely in open shoulders, hips up nice and extended. As you know, through all the extensive work that you do, most athletes can't achieve true shoulder extension.
Yeah.
Okay. They will compensate through thoracic and lumbar spine, unfortunately. Now, the byproduct of that is when they hit a solid surface like the vault, or a pretty solid surface, it does have a little bit of give. Remember, the strongest surface wins. So if the lumbar spine is extended in a weak core, that when the athlete hits the vault, it's just going to make them collapse even more.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be, again, through the thoracic. It could be through hitting with a very slight shoulder angle, that if they haven't got the rigidity through the shoulders when they contact and they hit that vault surface, the shoulders automatically going to close.
Yep.
So we've almost got to look to the what are the physical solutions to the technical problems.
Yep.
So that's always going to be my first tick box. Can this athlete actually achieve the positions that I'm looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Some athletes will therefore, because they might not be able to bend back very much, they might need to be able to get the hip up higher onto the vault. They might need to go higher onto the vault than another athlete in order for them to get their hands in the optimum position on the table. So it's about finding where that optimum contact point is. But really, you've got to replicate through your drills the repulsion again. So forwards, we did a handstand hop, and there's no reason why backwards you can't do the same thing. It's not easy, but nor is doing a straight Yurchenko. So doing a standing back handspring onto a panel mat, for example, that stops in handstand, and then doing it so that it bounces off the hands. They're great ways of checking the athlete's understanding of upper body stiffness and repulsion.
Yep.
Same thing on trampoline. Handstand bounces on a mini tramp. Handstand bounces on a springboard. These are really good ways of checking that they're physically able to do it and they technically comprehend what you're asking for. I guess a gold standard drill for a backwards Yurchenko vault would be, and in fact, I've just watched a national team do this in the last sort of month or so, is to do sort of 4 or 5 steps on the approach, round off, back handspring back to the table, hit the vault, and hop.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really tough to do.
Yeah.
Really tough to get the athlete to not just pass over the vertical position and leave the hands on the vault and put the feet down. So that would be very much a gold standard drill for teaching them how to block effectively.
Right.
And ultimately, it's not going to be down to fancy exercises. You could probably just choose 3 exercises to help an athlete block forwards and backwards. Okay, you can choose half a dozen for the run, half a dozen for the board contact. You don't need this massive catalog, but you do just need to be really, really precise and patient with the positions. If you've only got to teach a straight Yurchenko over let's say a 6-year period, that's a lot of time. It's a lot of time, but if you've got to use that time efficiently and not spend time on unvaluable exercises, what I call fluffy stuff, you've got to have a fluff filter. You've got to look at stuff and go, is that exercise actually beneficial? Like, is this exercise going to solve the problem? And the problem is actually my kids can't even do a handstand on the floor.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what drill I choose that I find online or the internet. Until my athlete can do a handstand, all of these drills are going to be useless to me. So turn the fluff filter up as high as possible and really focus on, like, actually what's going on here. This is basic stuff.
Yep.
Are they upright? Are the legs straight? Do they rise or do they collapse? Like, this is not complex stuff, but it is precise. And that's going to be setting the difference between coaches with patience that are doing a good job on vault and those that aren't.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this and you're kind of like, okay, well, my athlete just can't get their arms over their head, like I should just not bother. Well, you and I have talked extensively, and I've done multiple podcasts. We have classes together. There are very easy and good solutions based off solid science to get a better shoulder angle, to get a hip more flexible, to get stronger in the shoulders. So look back on the podcast or find some content between Nick and I, because there is an abundance of stuff that you can help with. Spend 2 weeks, like you said, and just get a better shoulder angle, right? Sometimes if you have the right screening tools and the right application of scientific methods, you can fix these shoulder issues in 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And if that takes, if you're doing lots of these drills and these, say for example, you're doing a lot of just like tempos, you're doing a lot of just board drills while you fix their shoulder problems, and it takes a month, even in the middle of the season, and it's just not going well, that's better because they have 10 years of Yurchenko after that. Put your time in the things you need to, like get to the rate limiting factor and fix that for once, rather just throwing, like you said, tons of drills at the athlete. That frustrates them because you keep asking them to put their shoulders open and they physically can't, or their back starts to hurt and your wrist starts to hurt, which is, I see a lot of the problems is really have a critical mindset about how you're approaching these things before you just start throwing stuff at the athlete, hoping one of these drills magically shows a better shoulder angle.
Yeah, it's about being efficient with your time. I mean, I often recommend to clubs that they vault less than they do, because what they'll do, let's say an athlete trains 5 times a week, they're doing a relatively easy vault, like a pike souk, for example. And I say, okay, if this athlete who's been doing this pike souk for 3 years already, and they don't seem to be capable of doing anything more than that, so maybe they've kind of reached their limit, and I say, if you only vaulted twice a week instead of 5 times a week, what's the chances of her losing that pike souk? And they said, oh no, she can do it all the time. So why bother going to vault 5 times? Instead, could you substitute 3 of those vault sessions with a specific physical preparation program, which will help her acrobatically? And actually, you might find that by spending less time on vault and more on physical prep, you can actually get her to do a Yurchenko or a handspring front or something a little bit different, because just spending time on the vault runway is not going to help vault all the time. I mean, don't get me wrong. If the coaching's right, then it does. But like I said before, I think only about 30% of my vault time is spent on the table itself. And then when I say that, I mean with the developmental stuff. Like
Sure.
Kids in the foundation developmental ages. It's a little bit different with seniors. It's probably 70-30 the other way around. But with a younger kid, get them on the tramp, get them used to flipping, raise their awareness. Go just flip on stuff, flip over stuff, flip under stuff. I don't know. Just be as versatile and as adaptable as possible.
Yep.
And therefore it will make vault more interesting, rather than what I see a lot of the time is we're on vault, so we put them on the vault run, we've got the vault too high, and they just go up to high mats or they flip, and that's about as interesting as the vault session gets, and it just doesn't have to be like that.
Yep, absolutely. And this is a conversation for a different time, but like that, what you said about younger athletes and versatile and 70-30 with 7 is a huge reason why the elbow OCD injury rate is staggering right now, because kids are just like going on the vault table, round off, not physically prepared, not really technically prepared. And they just get in a line, they do 20 Yurchenkos or 20 front handsprings and their elbows blow up. So not for this conversation, but that is important as well. And so well, I respect your time and I don't want to go too long, but naturally this progression would be to continue with good, shape changing and good flipping things into the pit, right? There's not much more work to be done. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a perfect execution of the run, the round off, the actual whip to the table and good blocking angle, right? Then the flip should naturally come as you as long as you don't want to rip your feet down to the ground too early, but things should come naturally if you're doing things up to this point well, right?
Yeah, I think we've covered some of those phases there, and as much detail as we can over audio. So let's say we've created all that energy. The vault should be doing a lot of work. The springboard should be doing a lot of work. The athlete just needs to remember and be aware of how to snap. Some people call it a snap down. Some people call it a snap up. I call it the Corbett action because I'm European. But that snapping action is essentially where all your rotation is going to come from, or the added rotation of the vault's giving you a bit, and then you've got to do the rest. So yes, hopefully it all kind of comes together. I mean, it's not quite as simple as that. We know that it's going to be trial and error. We've got to fix head positions, body shaping, and things. But again, a lot of those seeds should have already been planted through the 6 basic acrobatic skills that I mentioned before. Like the whip, the flick, the front handspring, etc. So you're not essentially teaching those things for the first time in terms of head position. They should already know that. You learn things off the vault and you transfer it to the vault.
Yeah.
So
Perfect. I think as well, man. So we're already up to the hour mark, and I'm going to plug you in all of your work and saying that I'm going through the master classes. I've been a part of them, and the bars, floor, and vault ones that are up there have a lot of these concepts. And so if people are, again, like you say, visually, it's hard to get as much as you can out of audio as you can. But these things are online. You've done an amazing job with those kind of things, and which leads to what we're doing and coming up in April. Do you want to chat about what's happening next year?
Yeah, so a bit of context. In August of 2019, so about five months ago, I launched the Masterclass series, which is basically a series of live events. They're not my usual kind of GymCon conference styles. We're back to the spit and sawdust, being in a gym, and just knuckling down to what we do best, which is coach. So every month, or almost every month, we've got 10 taking place this year, and we've got a clinic taking place in the UK, in various parts of the UK, with guest speakers coming in talking about a host of different topics. We've got ballet, we've got choreography, we've got a number on physical preparation, and all the individual apparatus for WAG as well. So these clinics are attracting audience sizes between sort of 60 and 120 at the minute every single month, and they're just a really good way of continual professional development for coaches, because you know, spending the day with myself and some guest speakers that are coming in, delivering on some just really practical content, all the different concepts that we're talking about now, and just sharing loads of ideas. And I'm honored that you're going to be coming over for your second physical preparation masterclass, because you were at my first live event, which was 2016.
I'm blushing.
Which went down really, really well, of course. And so yes, very pleased that you'll be joining me April 26th in London. So nice and close to people that want to fly in, and we're going to be spending the day, 6-hour session on physical preparation. So that'll be the physical preparation masterclass, April 26th in London. People can find out more information about the masterclasses at nickruddock.com/masterclass. Ruddock is spelled RUDDOCK.
Fantastic, man. Yeah, I can't wait to come over, and it's crazy how much I've changed my ways and learned since 2016. So I'm excited to give people, you know, everything I got. All the best stuff will be coming out for whatever they want to learn from me. So it's going to be good. But Nick, man, thank you so much again for your time. I think another just knockout podcast for vaulting stuff. And anything else that you want to share with the crowd before we part ways?
No, just, you know, really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I hope I've been able to articulate this message enough. It's always a bit tricky over audio without the use of video with some of these key positions. But yes, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience, definitely to share about the masterclass as well. And as always, just want to thank you for everything that you're doing, both personally and professionally. Really appreciate your support and your continued guidance. And I know this podcast is going down really well also. So yeah, thanks, buddy. Keep it up.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. And the video, we will put the video up on YouTube for people who can see your amazing pivot action with your pen.
Oh, you should have told me that before. Deary me.
Surprise.
Would have had a shave and everything. So.
All good. This is the real Nick.
There we go. Thanks, buddy.
All right, man. Have a great day.
Cheers.